Thank you so much for spending this energy and your intention with me today. I want to get right into it. So I appreciate you logging in and love to say hey. And I just want to make sure I can get all these thoughts out. So wherever you are and at what time you're tuning in, invite you to take a deep breath and create invitation. And in this invitation to simply say, I welcome the wisdom of the ancients to remember through me. All that means is we are surrendering and opening up our intellect in order that our heart, our collective heart, can receive all of the good that already is there. So I welcome the wisdom of the ancients to remember through me that who I am and where I am and what I am is enough. I welcome the power of the ancients to flow through me, simply meaning that I recognize that the undeniable intelligence, power, and beauty of that which is God is also within me and available to me to the degree of my willingness to be its channel, to be its voice, to be its hands and feet, unencumbered, as much as I am willing to recognize and own for myself. And I welcome the love of the ancients to create as me. That everything that I do on this planet, every action, every thought, every deed, every word, is encased in this divine energy that moves beyond the limiting perceptions of us and them, and recognizes that there is only one organism, one thing ever happening, and it is love. I welcome all of that. I open to that. May our time together this morning be fruitful, and may we all receive and experience exactly what it is that we need in this moment to remember, to remember, to remember. And so it is. Good morning, beloveds. What an interesting week. I want to acknowledge the events of the world, particularly those of us living in the United States, and I want to recognize those events, and then in the recognition of that, I want to extend to you the reminder of the constancy of wholeness. And I know at times what a tall order that is. And if it helps today, while you are engaged in this time together, to put your hand over your heart, that might be a really great helpmate energetically in order for you to remind yourself to move from here back down to here with regards to what you hear, or even with regards to whatever feelings come up. If you place your hand over your heart during our time together, and you just kind of tap and let that be the signal to stay here, then I think we can really share in some mighty work. I was scheduled to speak on Wednesday, California time, late at night for a Wednesday night program for a center in Santa Rosa, California. And that had been booked a long time ago, and even the topic had been booked a long time ago, which was oneness. And I was going to bring to the table all the things that I felt or were personally applying to help me remember that oneness is the constant, and that we are all one individuation of God, regardless of the effect. And then Wednesday happened, the events of the Capitol here in the United States, and I was like, wow, it's really good to stay in the moment. It's really good to be willing to listen to what new approach, or as I love how the master teacher Jesus did, what parable might want to spring forth in order to help us remain here and get out of here. And so I sat in the quiet. I wasn't going to go on until 10 p.m. my time, so I had some time and some space, and I sat. And inexplicably, a memory came up from more than 30 years ago when I lived in Southern California. I was a member of a trio called Alliance, and we were a musical trio, and we spent a great deal of our time with Louise Hay, but we also spent a great deal of time traveling to spiritual centers, to centers for spiritual livings, to unity churches, and that's sort of where the blossoming of our work happened. And so there was a Wednesday night series that I remember we were involved in. I don't remember how long, but it was in Redondo Beach. And we would travel there, and there was a minister who had been there for many years. And when we sang, and then he spoke, and he gave the audience about a 10-second warning. And he said, I want you to know I'm about to throw something into the audience. And what he threw into the audience was a baked potato. And the baked potato was wrapped in aluminum foil. And it was a good thing that he gave that 10-second warning, because, those things have some weight to them. And he was shouting sort of instructions about the potato, and he said, pass it on. Don't hold on to it. It's hot. Pretend that it's hot. Imagine that it's hot. And so you can imagine there was a few minutes of just mayhem as this potato wrapped in aluminum foil, which wasn't hot, but we were to imagine it was being tossed around, and finally it sort of fell to the ground, and the exercise or the example was over with. And he explained that we had the opportunity, we actually had the responsibility to treat all negative thought like that hot potato. And that as soon as it showed up, that we had the ability to drop it. And I remember how everybody oohed and awed and, oh, how clever, and yeah, I get it. And so it was just a wonderful instructional tool, I thought. And then I even used it, I remember, over the course of the years. And I think I may have substituted, a beach ball or something. I don't know. But the point is that at the time, at the level of my understanding, I nodded at that agreement. And as I was preparing for this talk on Wednesday night, I thought, where did that memory come from, and why? Why am I thinking about that all of a sudden? And then it sort of hit that I don't know if I would be in agreement with my response to that exercise anymore. Because what I began to see is that dropping the hot potato, or dropping the negativity, doesn't necessarily change my mental relationship with the potato. I can outmove, I can outrun, I can out-workshop, I can try to out-affirm that baked potato. But if I haven't really turned to it, and once the heat has settled down and I can pick it back up, I may not fully understand then my response or my relationship to the negative thought. And what if it's not a negative thought? What if it's just a thought that I, in my intellect and in my skill, have not fully resolved? Do you see my point? My point is that I believe, and I'm very guilty of this as a teacher. Please forgive me if you were ever a student and I instructed you in that way. That we move away from things. We keep your focus on this thing. And yes, that's true. And it's never a but. It's an and. And fixating ourselves on sort of the sobriety of our spirituality is to understand that there is still that part of us that has an addiction to the fear. And so the fear is also a very wise teacher. So where am I going with this? Well, as we look at the events of this week, I realize how often we can spiritualize fear. without by trying to outdistance it or paint a pretty picture rather than turning to it. Turning to it does not mean that you abide in it. Turning to it means that you acknowledge it. And then you go upon your path or your skill set or your relational spiritual understanding in bringing resolution to it. Not just moving away from it, not just turning away from it, but helping bring a resolution to it. I was speaking this morning virtually in New York City, and the topic was humanity in recovery. And recovery, or the word sobriety, which is a part of recovery, in the recovery traditions, it contains abstinence. And yet when you look at the origin of the word sobriety, to be sober means to be without impairment. And I don't know back then with the potato if just simply dropping the potato would have remedied the impairment. I would just be trying to outmaneuver it or be more clever than it. You see, it's kind of that thing of wherever you go, there you are. We can outdistance, we can divorce, we can do all kinds of things in the human experience, but we take that same energy with us. And so sobriety is to be without impairment. And when I look at what the synonym for that might be, it's wholeness. Wholeness allows us to pick up the potato and to love the potato for its opportunity to bring us back to the one. So instead of the potato being bad, it's a part of the restoration of our remembrance that all is God. It kind of goes back, if you've been joining me on these Sunday morning broadcasts, even when we went back to the beginning or the end of last year and we did our sort of burning bowl, I said, what is it that you desire? What is your word for the year? And what is the polarity of that word? Because the polarity of that word, or the seeming opposite of it, is a great, wise, and wonderful teacher. It is the thing that prompted the desire or made the desire become more activated. It is a crucial element in the reminder that we already are whole. So as I look at the events of the week and I continue to see the perpetuation of the division of us in humanity, the seeming two sides of the fence, I don't have an answer. I don't have a one and done, one size fits all solution for how to remove those layers of division. But what I do know, or at least what I know for myself and what I've experienced, because I've taken the knowing from here and done my best to apply it, is that when I walk into the systemic chasm, the issue, the division, when I walk into it with a willingness to be love, things change. And I must trust the fact that change is sufficient for that time. This division in humanity is not new. It has been a part of us since the first breaths of all sentient beings. And here is our cycle of the lesson once again. And the lesson, the cyclical lesson, appears because it creates an invitation to you and I to once again ask ourselves, how deep do we want to go with this? How much do we want to be dependent upon other people fixing it? Or how much are we willing to become spiritually sober, to be to be more whole rather than impaired in our perceptions and in our thinking and in our experiences. To be impaired or to lapse in our spiritual sobriety is to get sucked into the effect, to become intoxicated by the theories and the us and them and the heightened anger. Spiritual sobriety is an opportunity that says, let not your heart be troubled. If you study the commandment of be not afraid or let not your heart be troubled, it is said it's probably the most populated commandment given in Holy Scripture. It's because we need it. We need to hear it so much, right? Let not your heart be troubled. Be not afraid. The context of those words is given far more than most any commandment within Holy Scripture. And why? Because forgetfulness is so seductive. It's actually a part of the curriculum, and I don't want to make the seduction wrong. I don't want to make the baked potato wrong. I want to be able to turn to it and be not afraid of it. Isn't that beautiful? I can look at the division and not be afraid of the division, but look at the division as a calling for me to do my work. The master teacher, Jesus, was smart because he did not talk to the people from here. He talked from here through the use of parable. Parable, then, was the ability to tell a story in a way that could illustrate and restore them to a sort of sobriety or a wholeness that they already had within them. And so story is always good. And I was looking at stories and sharing some with clients and people, and I came across this one that I had forgotten about. And it was about a man named Fred, a successful businessman who had worked really hard and accumulated a lot of financial wealth through his successes and was ready to buy this mansion. And he wanted the grounds, the landscaping, to reflect the opulence of the mansion. And so he reached out to a friend who was a very well-known horticulturist, and she was exemplary in her field. And the story says that Fred had these great visions for his grounds. But he was very, very busy. Very busy. He traveled a lot. And so he kept emphasizing to his friend the need to create a garden in such a way that it would require very little maintenance on his part. He said that automatic sprinklers were an absolute necessity, and he was always on the lookout for labor-saving devices and other ways of cutting time. And finally, his friend said to him, Fred, I can see what you're saying, but there's just one thing that you need to deal with before we go any further. If there's no gardener, Fred, there's no garden. If there's no gardener, Fred, there's no garden. If there's no spiritual sobriety, sobriety of fear, the ability to move beyond the condition of fear. If there's no willingness to do the work with our own fear, then there is no garden, or there is no relief from that fear. And as you know, no one can do that for us. It reminded me of, and I've shared this story before, when I lived in Los Angeles, and finally after nearly a quarter of a century living there and multiple moves, that my final place was a cottage on a horse ranch, which is very unusual in Los Angeles. And so it was a fortunate place to be. It was in need of repair. The grounds, I was given carte blanche to be able to do what I wanted, and I inherited a fountain on that property. And I got it repaired sufficiently to run and enjoyed it. Just like Fred, I'm sure, would enjoy his garden. And then that enjoyment was minimal because the twigs and the leaves and the algae and all of the things would clog the fountain. And I wanted shortcuts like Fred. So I went to a statuary store, to a garden store, to look at things that would cleanse the fountain, the shortcut. And I could pour this solution, and it was supposed to remedy the algae. It just made it worse, and it poisoned all of the flowers. It kept the birds away because they now no longer wanted to come and swim in poison water. And the realization was that without me maintaining the fountain, there would be no fountain. Without me being willing to surrender to the work and to make the work a spiritual practice. In other words, to scrub it on a daily basis as if it was the most holiest of temples. To pour in the water with intention. And then in my devotion, and that's the beauty of living in California, is that many times you could go outside 365 and sit, and I would go and sit and have my coffee and be at one with the fountain. But the preparation of the temple was crucial to the sobriety, to mending the impairment of whatever thought was happening at the time. Whatever impairment that you're experiencing, beware of the intoxication of trying to outdistance, out-spiritualize it. Turn to it. Turn to the pain, and again ask yourself, what is mine to do? Because you can understand that all action, all disruption is birthed from a cause. That cause then is a thought, and the thoughts that reside in the chasm of us range from not being seen, not being heard, not being valued, fear of what's going to happen to me, fear of losing identity. The same fear that you are seeking sobriety from are the same fears of those that you oppose. And so there will never be one person winning and one person losing. There must be common ground. How we do that, I do not know. But what I do know is that when you take on the mantle of your own impairment, and you don't chastise it, you don't look at it from a punitive, visionary place, but you look at it with compassion. And you devote the rest of your life in this world to loving people, to feeding people, to serving people, not proselytizing to them per se, but doing what you can to show up as the light in the world. You must trust then that your individual sobriety has influence. I shared the story about the fountain with the New York audience this morning, and I had forgotten that the minister in New York had actually visited me at that cottage in LA decades ago. And he goes, "That is so funny that you should bring that up, because I remember that fountain." And he goes, "But you went off to work one day and I sat in your cottage." And he said, everything that you had in there reflected your travels from around the world. Everything had meaning, which was nice to hear. Everything, it wasn't cluttered. And he goes, and I had not felt such peace before. And when he said that, I thought, could it be that because I was so devoted, I had become and surrendered to the sobriety of cleaning the fountain for myself, of taking responsibility for the flow of that the energy of that permeated inside my space? And he goes, could be. And I want to share with you today that you and I are temples. You're a walking, breathing, sacred space, a temple. Whatever it is that you do inside in your devotion, whatever it is that you devote towards your wholeness, the revealing of your wholeness and less of your impairment creates a vibration. And so if you're wondering about what it is that you do that. And then show up in the world. I feel many times that I am inadequate. Because once an event is over or once a talk is over, I just go, I should have said this, I should have said that. And there's so much second guessing. But at least there are loving individuals in my life who go, it doesn't matter what you say. What matters is the energy and the intention that you bring. And so Maya Angelou was right. People will forget what it is that you say. People will forget what it is that you do. But they will never forget how you made them feel. I have made people feel. I have been the catalyst for people's feelings of not good and good, of unloved and loved. I have done that. And so it works with both spectrums. If I participate in the noise of the us and them, people will not forget how I made them feel. I must dedicate myself. We must dedicate ourselves to finding a way to bridge the divide. I wish again that I had a manual for how to do that, but I don't believe it is contained within a manual. I believe that it is contained within your willingness, my willingness, to be spiritually sober. A sobriety from fear. A sobriety that does not wait for something in the future or for someone else to do it, but who takes on the mantle of that and the possibility of that and realizes that you already are whole. It's just that the impairment, the effect of the cause or the thought of not being whole, it's just clouded things. I don't mean for that to be or sound oversimplified, but I do want to remind you that it is in the simple, in here, the simple, where the origin of love and power is. Let us not lose ourselves in here, in the intellect. Let us return to the wholeness that beckons. Thank you again. I'm with you in prayer. I am hopefully with you by example. I think it's important that we be the example. I think that it will be a tremendous helpmate if you create a decision this week of how you can bring wholeness to a situation. Don't label it as insignificant. Use it as your own personal laboratory. Use it as your own recovery meeting, if you will, where you are going in and you are making a vow, one day at a time, to not be intoxicated by fear. Bless you. Thank you for your support. The way that you can do that, again, is listed in the instructions of this video. Share it. Love one another. Till next time.